This is quite interesting. This is some good stuff here. So thanks a lot, Not a Space Agency.
Sounds like we've got people interested in looking into the real facts about Apollo.
Yes, and then there's another one that he sent, and I thought it was good. In this other document, it was window insertion and mosaicing program description. Now, this is interesting because this is what you call an Idams system. So, two Idams image tapes are accepted as input with the primary input tape as defined on the task control card considered as the base and the secondary input tape the window as single composite Idams image and output. This is talking about a photographic system that was used for taking photographs on some of these space probes, some of them. It's quite interesting, some of the things that he's got up here.
Yes, it's like an optical printer where you're taking two images and putting them together as one.
But it's still using photographic film and converting it to digital. That's fair enough, because then it can be put online. But it started life as photographic film. So there's a lot of playing around with it to get it correct. It's almost as if they knew they had to do that. We shall see.
It was a technique that was used by the movie industry way back.
Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, the movie industry knew exactly how to do these things. You remember in Ask Us Anything, I'd made the comment about the SR-71 pilot who could read his instrument panel when the lights were out, and somebody wanted the reference. Now, that's the reference book to my comment about being able to read an instrument panel by starlight. It's page 76 of Sled Driver by Brian Huell, S-H-U-L. I've actually owned this for about 20 years, this copy. I checked it out on Amazon recently, and it's available for $400. $400! It's not being printed anymore. I mean, that's ridiculous.
Does it have moon dust in it?
Well, it's got something in it. It must be very popular. I mean, it's got some wonderful pictures of the SR-71, and it's very well described by the author of flying it across to Vietnam to do the photography and back again.
So he could see by starlight.
That starlight was that bright, flying over the Pacific at 78,000 feet, and he thought there was another aircraft alongside him until he looked out and saw it was the Milky Way. So starlight is very bright when you're that high up. I mean, 78,000 feet, what's that, about 12, 15 miles up? Not that high. A bit higher than Mount Everest, about twice the height of Mount Everest.
No, but you're in pretty thin atmosphere. Yeah, at nighttime, I guess there'd be very little atmospheric distortion as well. Then you would think that the astronauts, if they were flying to the moon, would have remarked on such an event.
Well, an SR-71 pilot who's probably the most highly trained aircraft pilots, this was mid-1970s. You'd think astronauts would know about these things. I mean, Armstrong had been up to that height. He'd been higher than that. He'd been to 300,000 feet in the X-15. So you'd think they
claimed.
Well, yes, claimed.
But he's been easily that height.
Yes, he'd been at that height. So a lot of other people. Sled Driver by Brian Huell, S-H-U-L. Incredible book. Subtitled Flying the World's Fastest Jet. Extraordinary book. It's actually published in the UK by Midland Publishing Limited.
Sled Driver at Amazon is $976.
Whoa!
And 5 cents.
Oh, I've got $1,060.64 here on Amazon Prime CA. $1,060.64. I'm taking a photograph of this.
Yeah, it's a good book.
And that's for the hardcover.
Yeah, it's hardcover with dust jacket. Yeah, it was introduced in 1966, the SR-71. Lady in Black, they call it. It's a fabulous plane. I've always really admired it.
Wow, though, that's nuts.
It is. It's extraordinary. You'd think somebody would take it up and reprint it because it's obviously a popular book. I mean, $1,000 for a book. I better keep mine under lock and key. Yeah, Sled Driver. It's a great book about this incredible aircraft. Absolutely amazing aircraft. Probably far more capable than many of the rockets that were about at the same time.
This was put up 1.9 million views 3 years ago, this presentation by Brian Huell.
That's right. He's probably the best known of the SR-71 pilots because of his book. He also writes very well about flying at that sort of altitude.
I believe that was the fellow that took that famous photograph of the jet fuel leaking out of the SR-71. What he did was, while one of them were flying, he was in another plane. He was a photographer at first, and he was taking photographs of this plane. He wasn't supposed to take photographs of that plane. It was top secret, but he did it anyway, and he gave it to his commanding officer, and he was so impressed by that photo that he now was their official photographer, and he gave it to him to hang on his wall in his office. That was the whole purpose of this, because he said that it's such a beautiful plane, it needs to be photographed.
Yeah.
So he did it, and then when he showed his commanding officer, that did it. Now they want some decent photos of this thing.
Yeah. So
I remember him saying that, first of all, he said they filled it up. Then when they got to cruising altitude, then they had to fill it up again with the tanker. And then when they came down, they had to fill it up again for them to land.
Yeah.
I mean, that's crazy. The fuel that thing ate. And it was a special fuel. Like, it was really a crazy cocktail that they had in those fuel tanks.
This plane was developed as a result of the U-2 spy plane.
And then we have these two fellows over here, which is quite interesting. It's called Debate. Was the moon landing faked? Now, these two guys are going at it now.
I could only watch small portions of it as I skip through. Basically, you've got two guys fighting over one brain cell. I mean, absolutely ridiculous. I see the style that they're using on Debate site. It's exactly like McToon is, right? Just get cut off. The guy's just cutting off the other guy all the time, but neither one of them have any knowledge of the subject. That's number one. And then you have a moderator who now he calls himself Doctor, but he does it with a comma, DR with a comma, not DR with a period. So I don't know what that means. Anyway, the two people that are in that debate have no idea how incredibly stupid they look that they would do that publicly. Not only do they not know anything about the subject matter, but their general behavior. Absolutely ridiculous. I just had to stop. I just kind of scanned through on a bunch of stuff. They were talking about the rover and the dust, and they had a diagram up of it. And of course, they get it wrong. They can't even read it right. So neither one of them can.
Right.
Right? One's claiming it's on Earth, the other's claiming it was on the moon, and neither one of them understand what the lunar surface should look like, nor can they read the diagram that NASA has posted showing if it's without an atmosphere, it would be a complete arc.
No, but look at this. He says, ballistic motion of the dust particles in the lunar roving vehicle dust trails. Then he shows the graph, measured dust trajectory, clip 1. Well, it is going in a bit of an arc that they're showing here. But here's the thing. If that was on the moon, when that rover kicked up the dust, it's like a sieve, and it's shooting it out the back. Well, that dust would just keep going and going and going and going, but that's not what we see. It almost is like it hits a wall and then it starts falling down. But they're in the sunlight. Guess what's going to happen? It's going to have a positive charge on it, and it's going to start to levitate. How many times have we shown those diagrams of people at MIT saying this? It's not us that are saying it. These are physicists at MIT that are claiming this.
And of course, what you see coming off of the rover, you can see it hit the atmosphere.
Yeah, of course you can.
It comes out in sharp bars like that coming off the back. And of course, none of that would be happening if you were on the lunar surface, because you wouldn't be able to even see the astronaut for the dust coming off the front wheels, with that cosmic dust coming off of there. And with the photoelectric charge, it's not going to come back down again. It'll be there for the rest of their mission. It's not going to come down until the sun leaves.
Exactly.
Simple as that. And that's the same with the landing. That dust is going to come up and it's going to stay up. Right?
Well, like it does on Earth. I mean, when you see rally cars out in the desert creating these huge dust clouds behind them, those dust clouds stay there for maybe half an hour.
I did do a video on that way back. And we had shots of groups of horses running and the clouds of dust coming up, and the dust is just hanging there, and cars on dusty roads and stuff like that. This has zero moisture on the moon. There's absolutely no compression. There's no rainfall. There's no nothing. You don't get a snowfall and that compresses the soil.
Yeah.
This is fine cosmic dust over 3.8 billion years. Let's give it from 4.5 when it formed. Let's say the dust, if it was a little volcanic, wouldn't be actually landing there. So for 3.8 billion years. If it took 1,000,000 years to put a layer of dust down as thick as a piece of paper, you're still up to your neck in this stuff. 1,000,000 years to put down that's 3,800 sheets of paper.
But these guys are going over retroreflectors, but what they don't seem to realize, or at least what the fellow that's for the moon landings, he's claiming here, well, both of them, it says that retroreflectors, yes, they bounced lasers off the moon. That's fine and dandy. But here's the thing. They don't seem to realize that MIT did this in 1962, 1963, somewhere in there, and they don't realize this. And how many times have I shown that video of that laser that they first used? There was no reflectors up there at that time, folks.
No.
And yet they still got a return.
Yeah.
And exactly prior to that, they claimed that they were running radio waves bouncing them off the moon. They could have been bouncing them off the atmosphere, but they claimed in the 1930s and that they were bouncing radio waves off the moon. It was being used in the Second World War.
Yeah, it was. It was a very secure form of communication, which is why they did it. But the idea that MIT had done it in 1962 and the Russians had done it the following year, they don't seem to know that, because that is a part of the discussion.
But they don't seem to know a lot of things. Like, for example, I asked Chat GPT yesterday. Scott was there. We just had some fun with it. I asked Chat GPT, did Apollo 17 take mice along to the moon with them? And it says, no, they did not. And it kept telling me, that how wrong I was. So I said to Chat GPT, it says, oh, yes, they did. That's exactly what I said. Oh, yes, they did. And then I went, ... you're lying. And you know what it comes back and says? It comes back and it says, I've only been updated on July the 27th. That's its excuse. This thing is acting like a human. Now it's starting to pump out excuses. So I said to it, again, yes, they did. Apollo 17 had 5 pocket mice that were brought along. Then it says, oh, yes, you are correct. They did bring pocket mice along, but they didn't take it to the surface. You forgot to ask that question. This is what it was trying to tell me, that I had to ask that question or rephrase it. But it was lying at first.
Of all the documents I have read over the years, I've never heard anything about Apollo 17 having mice.
No,
Oh, you have now.
first I've heard of it. Obviously, it was Gene Cernan taking his daughter's mice on a bit of a trip.
Oh, poor thing. No one died.
Now, I wonder why.
Well, they also scalped these mice and put a sensor on board to see the effect on their brain. Now, I don't know how the hell they got a machine that can read brainwaves in 1969 on a mouse, but apparently they had this attached to the brain. They absolutely scalped them and attached this to their skull, directly to their skull. That's what's in the article on the thing. And then they brought the mice back and dissected them. But they were these little tiny, tiny mice that they were using.
They were looking for radiation. Remember what they did also? They were injecting mice with moon rock samples.
Yes, they were. Weren't they letting them breathe moon dust in too?
Yep.
But over the number of years, and even reading all the biocharts on the men and everything else, and all the other testing for space anomalies, I've never heard about these mice before.
I've never heard about the mice.
Neither does Chat GPT.
Yeah, maybe they're mixing them up with the Russians.
It's an updated file. This is the problem.
Yeah.
Oh, well, no way. I looked back. It was 2011 was the first time I could find it.
Yeah, well, that's updated, because otherwise it would have been 1972.
Yeah, it should be 1972.
The document should be produced in 1972, 73 at the latest, when they finished the study.
Maybe they did take mice up there, but they didn't announce it because they get so much flack for cruelty to animals.
I'm sure they did it in a laboratory somewhere. They weren't taking them anywhere. They were just doing it in a simulation.
They were certainly using animals to inject them with moon dust to see if that had an effect. I remember that being publicized. But as for taking them on the alleged Apollo missions, if they weren't going to the moon, why take the mice anyway?
They could take the mice along and then do whatever they're going to do to them in low Earth orbit, because now they have a zero gravity environment that they can do things for a longer time than they could in the Vomit Comet.
I'll tell you, if they took mice, you know how fast they reproduce. I mean, it would be an environmental disaster. I mean, isn't that thing made of cheese? What are we going to do? There'd be holes in the moon everywhere.
Yeah, the moon is made of cheese and mice.
And then the Swiss would declare it was theirs.
Maybe that's why the Chinese think they've got rabbits up there.
Yeah, total environmental disaster to do that. My God.
I thought Russia was persona non grata in America these days, but they still manage to use their engines because they seem to work regularly, reliably. How many did NASA order? About 60, I think, 60 engines about 10 years ago.
Yes, well, it's just like not a space agency says, NASA, not a secret anymore.
I like that one.
Yeah, he's got quite a few when you go back through him. He comes up with new ones all the time.
That's good. Well, keep going. Keep going. It's always fun because NASA are not having a good time at the moment.
Well, no, they're having so many setbacks on their dates. And of course, I think the solar activity, I mean, it's still going to be increasing for another year from now. Then it just doesn't stop. Then it takes a few more years for it to get back down till it calms down again. You're not going to put anything up there. There's absolutely no point.
Well, it's like Trevor said this morning. He said, we're not going to see this happen in our lifetime, that's for certain.
That's true. Well, hopefully a few of the kids around today will be around when somebody manages to get beyond the Van Allen belts with humans. Satellites can easily get beyond them.
If you can talk to them. When you read all this stuff on SETI and stuff like that, and all they're sitting there is listening to white noise, I mean, that's the hiss from the Van Allen belts. And it's causing that much interference with their equipment. And they have the largest radio arrays out there. They're gigantic. The way they set those up so that when they're put together, it covers such a large area to receive a signal. They're listening to nothing.
And they got good script writers around them, haven't they?
Except Voyager 1. It can contact anything and send back all kinds of details. That's the amazing thing. It knows what's going on out there. You think SETI would be able to listen to Voyager 1.
And maybe some of the other stuff that's, the Viking probes that have been going out for years.
Well, there's that, and the fact that if SETI can listen to Voyager 1, it should be able to listen to the alien ships that Voyager 1 is encountering. And identifying life forms and all kinds of stuff. It's just unbelievable. It's so easy to trigger human imagination. And in this day and age, it can just go viral.
Yeah, you can just say whatever you like.
Yeah, and it can just be out there. It goes viral, and people just take it, and they just build on that imagination. When you were a kid, did you ever have that game where you whisper in each other's ear? There's a whole line of people. They give you something to say and find out what it actually means when it gets it's completely different, because you can't rely on anybody down there not to translate it exactly. Well, that's exactly what's happening. They can put out the smallest little thing, and human imagination just takes it right off the wall. Just keeps building on it and building on it and building on it. Except now it's coming back on NASA. Why the hell are you still sitting on the ground for? Why aren't you running around on Mars? It's coming back on them. And then they have to send things up and say, oh, well, we got to study it more. When was the first so-called probe landing on Mars? 76?
That, yep. The most famous example of that Chinese whispers was the message that started, send 3 and 4 pence, we're going to a dance. And it landed up with, send reinforcements, we're going to advance, which is how wrong you can get a message. 3 and 4 pence refers to the old English coinage system. 3 and 4 pence would be about 15p.
Our communication system is one of our finest features that we've ever come up with, except when you put humans and they interact I mean, the communication virtually to contact almost everybody in the world is one of the greatest things out there. Like talking the way we're talking now, incredible thing. But when you include a whole bunch of humans, they manage to muck it up.
Yeah, they do.
It really is. It's not beneficial anymore. It becomes a detriment. Like I said, just going on pure imagination. NASA probably enjoys that. People are building on the imagination from the little things that they put out. That's what Musk does. Like he puts something out, makes a little statement, and everybody's going to go watch his launch. Well, as a matter of fact, not that many people are watching his launch.
Do you remember it used to be called Space, the Imagination Station? Well, now it's NASA, the Imagination Station. Just change the words because it's about the size of it. Have you ever gone to a live that NASA shows from the ISS? I go there, yeah, it says live here on this channel, and I go over here, oh, it says live on that channel, and I take two of them, stick them together, and we got two different things happening. So which is it?
Depends which scriptwriter they've used that day.
They both say live.
I was checking through some films recently about Mars and the photographs on Mars, and there was one picture which showed the detail. It was on the Martian surface. I think they were trying to prove that there had been water flowing at some point. And the scale on the photograph, they showed it on the side of the picture, was 1 centimeter, about 2 centimeter length. The scale was 1 centimeter, which meant that it was very detailed. So how come you can get detailed photographs from Mars, and they were showing various rocks and various accumulations of silt and dirt around the rocks off the claimed rover? But the point is that if they could take a photograph that detailed on the Martian surface, which is a long way away, is Mars, compared to the moon, how come the best we can get from the moon is 40 centimeters from a satellite orbiting 15 miles above the surface? You'd think they'd have got their act together a bit by now. And that picture you produced, Robert, showing the landers on the lunar surface, you produced that. So the idea that the Arizona State University are the people who are responsible for distributing those images after NASA have recorded them at White Sands Missile Base, where they're received, I think that it's possible to intercept them and do a bit of Photoshop work on them before Arizona State University get hold of them. Because the lunar landers had 4 legs, we're told, not 3 legs.
You know something? Somebody took that photograph and they spun it around the other way, and it actually does look like a limb. I couldn't believe it.
That photograph, the 3-legged lander, has never been officially released.
Oh, no.
So anybody claiming that that is what Indian Space Agency found is wrong. It wasn't released officially. The Chinese haven't released anything officially. So there are no photographs from any other space agency.
I think they're doing the same thing as what Robert did, just off of one of their simulated launches, right? You just take a snapshot of that, and it takes a few seconds to do it. And I still believe that's why they keep those plaster molds around, just in case they need to take another shot of it.
Yeah.
Right? Because those are the only shots they have of the lunar surface. With those cameras, they're zooming in and out on those, and they have to make it match exactly. So they're going to have to go back to those to take another photograph if they need another photograph coming off of there. They're not going to get it from anywhere else, those molds. I don't know why they don't have those displayed in historical events showing how they did all the simulations. They just skipped that part in the museums.
Yeah.
Well, that's the real thing. We've shown that film can't work in a vacuum. So now we need to ask, where were these images created from? What locations? We should just be asking NASA, please show us where you did this.
Cannon Air Force Base, possibly.
Yeah, I think actually, the more I look at Cannon Air Force Base, they probably used it as a pretty good meeting place because it was remote. It only had just the airstrips and a couple of buildings sitting there. They didn't really have anything else to do it. They could have set up something small just to give a demonstration for the upper echelons, the guys with the top clearances to look at. And they might have even had the vice president down, something like that, because you couldn't have Nixon down. He'd be doing this all the time. So
yeah,
it's not going to help. But yeah, they could have had many meetings there because it was very central.
That list that Bart Sibrel produced of the people who were attending the June 1968 faking of Apollo 11 contained some very prominent names. And ironically, it also contained James Van Allen as one of the people who were there, along with President Johnson and Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and all the senior NASA personnel. So they were prepared to fake it, knowing that they had to do it in secret.
I think those would have been meetings in advance of the final shooting more than anything else. If they had any kind of equipment there, it'd just be for a quick demonstration for those people. Like the amount I've studied those photographs and what you see on the terrain, Cinder Lake, the material, the blast craters, they put Hadley Rill in there, the whole 9 yards are done there. They're all created there. And of course, Farouk was doing that. Those were all mapped out. That's where the cue cards were created. Everything was created there. All the timing, the whole 9 yards. And when you put all that together, plus the gantry cranes, all of the buildings that they had available, and on top of that, they had one for the public to come and view on the interview, and then they had another setup with blast craters in there to make a moon set, which is a whole lot closer to where that landfill site is. And that seems to be quite prominent, the stuff that's sticking out of the ground. It just happens to be there, and it's still there today.
Yeah, you can go and look at it.
Well, they showed that they did 2 sets of blast craters, one above and below on the set there. Hadley Reel ran in between them when you look at it, and you can see the scale down. And then when you look at the scale of what you see in the photographs of Hadley Reel, I mean, it's 140 feet across and it's 60 feet deep.
It's supposed to be a mile across, isn't it?
It's supposed to be like the Grand Canyon. And I mean, that's why they went to the Grand Canyon.
At least they know what it looked like.
Yeah, but they couldn't capture that in the images when they were shooting Hadley Reel at Flagstaff. So when you add all of those things up, like all of their practice, all of the timing, everything being recorded in the Finney file, as well as in the cue cards and that, when you add all of that up, you know exactly where it's located.
No, it's a good point.
And when people say, well, it has to be indoor, it has to be this, no, it doesn't. You can use non-invasive filters on any camera and remove a blue sky.
That's quite simple to do.
But when I asked Tim and I said, how long has that been around for? Well, they were doing it for outdoor scenes back into the 30s. They already had the filters on there. So it's not like it's new technology or it had to be created for NASA. It was already in existence.
Talking of creating, the film, the Ron Howard film of Apollo 13 with Tom Hanks as Jim Lovell, that was all filmed here on Earth. Every single frame of it was filmed here on Earth. So to say that you cannot recreate the effects of space in a film is just nonsense. That was filmed about, 30 years ago, mid-90s? Got 6 Oscars for it, so it must have been very good. So to produce a film showing space travel is not that hard. Hollywood's been at it for years. So if they wanted to earn some extra money working for NASA, no problem. That's what they do. They wouldn't talk about it necessarily because they probably didn't know exactly what was going on.
Yeah, but you can see the making of that particular film. And they show how many takes that they were taking when they're in the vomit comet and stuff like that, and how they're having to hang on and get the cameraman to stabilize the cameraman. There's people hanging on to him, because they're flying around. And like when you do it over and over and over again, the people are going to get sick. They're going to do whatever. You have to get the right crew in there at the same time to do it. But the final cut of that gives you the impression that they're in space.
Yeah, it does. It gives a very good impression.
I mean, it doesn't look any different. And those techniques have been around forever.
It's not difficult to do it. If you know what you're doing and you've been used to using that equipment. I mean, Tim Trumbull will probably tell you that it's really straightforward to do things like that. Any halfway decent cinematographer or film director will tell you it's very easy to do.
The only thing that triggers the imagination is when you walk into a movie theater and you watch a movie, you know it's a movie. All those special effects you're looking at, you know it's a movie. The difference is if they tell you that this is the real thing that's happening, it's still the same film footage, and you really can't tell the difference.
And it's still a movie.
It's still a movie. It's still a movie. It's still a movie.